We're back with another season of Policy Pizza, the show where we take you behind the scenes with the people who make public policy work. Some of the biggest things that affect all our lives are the ideas that end up in front of decision makers in business and government. So how do we get these super smart people to spend a few minutes with us? That's easy. Pizza. Each week, we'll sit down with an expert and find out about some of the most important ideas that are helping to make our world a better place. Our next stop is Chicago for some deep dish policy. We're meeting Austin Berg of the Illinois Policy Institute. Austin is the co-author of The New Chicago Way, which details Chicago's major policy issues and how to fix them. He's an expert on city government, and his work offers up ideas for cities across the country. Okay, so Austin Berg, right? We're in Chicago. We're gonna go get some deep dish Chicago pizza. But tell us a little bit about yourself and like how you ended up in Chicago.
So I was born and raised in Illinois. I was actually born in Evanston, just a few miles north of here. That's where Northwestern University is.
Oh, okay.
My mom was a scientist there.
Oh, what did she?
She was a cell biologist at Northwestern. Okay. Yeah. So she's the smartest person in our family. It's been all downhill since my mom. So yeah, I was born there, and then I really kind of bopped around all over the state. I moved around a lot as a kid. My dad actually ran for Congress in the small central Illinois town where he was raised. Okay. Outside of a town called Effingham. So we lived in some central Illinois towns, and then eventually I went to high school in the western suburbs here. And that's where I sort of developed my love for economics and political science. I was doing landscaping for a wealthy older woman. Okay. Just pulling weeds, me and this guy, Misael, who was her gardener. Okay. Great summer job because I was by myself, and it was the first by myself weeding and stuff. And it was the first summer where I could have a device that wasn't like a Walkman-sized chunky thing, but I could listen to things. So it was like the podcast explosion was happening. So I was listening to all sorts of podcasts. And my friend gave me an audiobook of Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. No. Okay. And it totally blew my mind. Wow. And that was really, and the fact that our economic freedoms are very tied to our civil liberties, and those ideas were really important to me. And so I went to college at Tufts University out east, and while I was at Tufts, I had an internship at the Illinois Policy Institute, and once I graduated, I really cared about their mission. I cared about the fact that they were fighting for Illinois, which is very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, it's your home. It's my home, and it's what gave prosperity to my ancestors when they immigrated here. And so I took an entry-level job at Illinois Policy on the marketing team. We were about 5 people in an actual closet on LaSalle and Adams, not too far from here. Tiny team. And we started doing digital storytelling and marketing. We started doing storytelling and digital marketing in a way that was sort of new in our space at the time, and had a lot of initial success with that. And that eventually turned into Ironlight, which is our agency where we do this kind of work all over the country. So you just started telling the stories when you were telling stories, was it mostly like ideas and concepts, or it was of real people? It was of real Illinoisans. So the one that really changed our lives was a woman from Decatur, Illinois, which was one of the tiny towns I lived in central Illinois. It's kind of a bombed out Rust Belt town, formerly prosperous, but industry has kind of left it behind. And we were doing some work on criminal justice reform, and a woman emailed me saying, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I said, "Great, I would love to talk." And she said, "Okay, I'm on the next train to Chicago." Wow. I was like, wow, this lady's really serious. She really wants to talk. Exactly. And so we met at the corner of LaSalle and Adams outside that office, and she told me her story. And she said, when I was 19 years old, I stole money from a Subway sandwich store cash register. I went to prison for a year. I committed this crime as an act of desperation, trying to feed my infant daughter. I was experiencing homelessness. But I got out of prison and I turned my life around completely. Okay. I raised 3 kids by myself. I started an anti-violence nonprofit. I developed a passion for nursing and worked as a nursing assistant. But it was never enough money to achieve my dream, which was to buy a home and get out of the dangerous neighborhood that we were living in. So she went to school for 7 years to become a registered nurse, which basically triples your pay overnight. And she was taking 1 or 2 classes a semester, studying on the bleachers at her kids' football games. Yeah. And she ends up passing all of her tests with flying colors, calls her mom saying, "I did it, we're moving out of the hood." Calls her kids saying, "I did it, we're moving out of the hood." And then she's an amazing woman, one of our heroes. And the next call she gets is from the state saying, "Because of the crime you committed more than 25 years ago, you are categorically barred from ever working as a registered nurse in the state of Illinois.
Goodness.
And as we all would, her response was, well, what do I do?
Yeah, because it's like it's bureaucracy, and you get a letter in the mail. Yeah, what do you do?
And the woman on the phone sort of flippantly said, well, you can get a pardon, or you can change the law. And she said, I'm going to change the law. And she hung up the phone.
Wow.
And so she went to session, legislative session in Springfield, every day of session for 2 years. And this, again, is a single working mom, talked to anyone who would talk to her. And she wasn't getting anywhere. Even her local representative wouldn't do anything about it because she thought it was sort of too hot to touch politically, and she was in sort of a vulnerable seat. And when she came here, we told her story, a very simple portrait-style photo of her, almost Humans of New York style, a long-form quote. And it totally blew up and went viral. We did a short documentary on her, and thousands of people contacted their lawmakers on Lisa's behalf.
That is awesome.
And that story has a really happy ending, which is that Lisa and I got to go to the community college where she studied and signed into law, Lisa's Law in Illinois, which allowed many rehabilitated, formerly incarcerated moms and dads across the state to work in healthcare legally. So during COVID, there was almost 1,000 nurses that would not have been able to serve patients.
Yeah, that's amazing because it's like
her.
People are trying to turn their lives around doing like the one thing that they should be doing, which is like finding a way to gain some skills and contribute, right?
So we did a lot of campaigns like that, and it's so gratifying when you're actually getting to work with people. And Ryan, who's the co-founder of Ironlight, and I basically said, well, this is really cool. We would love to do this for the rest of our lives, and we think we can do it not just in Illinois, but sort of all over. And
that's so awesome.
That's when Ironlight was born.
That's an amazing story. And you said you still keep in touch with her?
Yeah, we're really, really close friends. So last year, she actually bought her house. She achieved her dream last year.
Oh, man, nice.
Yeah, and we're working. There are more than a dozen states across the country where she still would not legally be able to work as a nurse. So we're doing impact campaigns in all of those states as well.
Yeah. Do you find other people like in those states who have been impacted?
What's so cool is there are local Lisas everywhere. And when we would do these screenings in those states, they would come up to us afterwards, or they would send a note on Facebook Messenger to Lisa. So yeah, that storytelling work is really core to a lot of what we do. And I think of it as very tied to my upbringing, especially being kind of thrown into a lot of different environments at a young age.
Yeah.
I feel like we hire people who can connect with anyone. Mm-hmm. We could go up to somebody on a street and learn their story, and that person would feel comfortable around them. So we take that stuff really seriously because we know it can change the world, like it did for her.
Yeah. You wrote a book about Chicago, about it's mostly about city politics and corruption and and you compare it to other cities.
Yeah, so we actually a board member at Illinois Policy Institute, Ed Backrack, and I, we wrote essentially the first book that compared Chicago's structure of governance. So what powers the mayor has, what powers the city council has, how the schools work, how the CTA works, the transit authority works, to the 15 largest cities in the United States. So people, have, especially in Chicago, sort of a cynical view of politics, and that it's always been this way, and there's no way it could ever change, and this is the way things have always been done. And our theory was, hey, why don't we pick our heads up and kind of look around at these other big cities that don't seemingly have the same challenges at the same scale or extent as Chicago, whether it's their finances or schools or violence. Why is that?
Right.
And so we talked to dozens of public officials in those states and in Chicago, states and cities and in Chicago, and then compared them, and it turns out we're an outlier in many ways in the way that we structure our government. So the book's called The New Chicago Way, and it's been amazing to see what's happened in the aftermath of that as we've tried to sort of change the vocabulary of reform in Chicago.
What was the vocabulary originally?
The vocabulary I would describe as sort of a two-step process. It was, let's say, three-step process. The first step is everything's corrupt. Step two is there's nothing we can do about it. Step three is sort of like shrug.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
There was no, and there was no discussion of how other cities work and how we could apply those lessons here.
Right.
And sort of the largest one was that Chicago alone, among the largest cities in the country, does not have what's called a city charter, which is basically a city constitution.
Okay.
And most people listening to this live in places that have those.
Yeah.
Chicago does not. And in the absence of that, just as if, the United States didn't have a constitution, what has arisen is this strongman form of governance where the mayor sort of calls all the shots in the city. And meanwhile, the aldermen, who are the people who control, Michigan Avenue, control these little wards, 50 wards across the city. They act as kings of their little mini fiefdoms.
Okay.
And that is really at the core of a lot of corruption that we see in the city.
And you said most cities have a charter. And how does the charter really work and legally?
So it's basically, you think of it like a voter-approved constitution. So the state usually has some rules in state law that dictates how you make a charter. But for example, New York and LA in the 80s and 90s reformed their charters and had voters approve them. And the charters lay out things like who are the elected officials versus the appointed officials? How does the budget get passed? What did voters get to vote on? Do they get to vote on taxes and new debt? Things like that. So it's almost like
some ground rules.
Some guardrails for how the city functions.
Yeah, that's crazy. So without it, it really is like a Wild West.
It's chaos. Yeah. And so you have mayors who make really, really poor decisions because we know without checks and balances, what do you get? You sort of get these dominant personalities, or one person isn't going to be able to make all the correct decisions, right? That's why you need checks and balances in government.
Yeah.
So if you look around, a good example of this would be our parking meters in Chicago, which may be the worst deal in the history of city politics in the United States.
Okay.
So in 2008, the mayor came up with this fabulous idea to sell the rights to the parking meters to a private company for 75 years.
Okay.
And he introduced this to the city council, and it passed in a matter of 2 or 3 days with very little scrutiny because the city council, for many reasons, is a rubber stamp on the mayor's power. And that netted the city $1.1 billion.
Wow.
And the idea was, hey, this is great. We can spread this out over the life of the contract. It's going to make sure that it's going to allow us to not raise taxes or fees on city residents. They spent it in 2 years.
Wow.
To plug budget holes. And when the deal was made, the parking meters made about $20 million a year.
Yeah.
Now, those meters generate around $150 million a year for a private company.
Wow.
So that was a one-person rule, right? With very little checks and balances.
That's like just one example of many, and
countless examples. So you stack up those examples over many decades, and what do you get? You get a city that has more pension debt than 44 of the 50 U.S. states. Just as a city, we're nearly junk rated in terms of our credit. Public safety is still a major challenge. We have so many amazing things as a city. I think Chicago is the greatest city in America. We just happen to be the worst governed because of this system. So I just don't think people really know that there is this constitution that governs how things work in your city.
Yeah.
And it's really the difference between being a deliberative democracy, where you can sort of, people have a say in the decision making of the city, and just bad government. So setting those rules is really important. And I think it's also a way that you can lock in the gains that you've made as a city. So, for example, if you're a really quickly growing city, there's going to be a lot of pressure on your municipal services, from schools to the transit authority to sewers, all this infrastructure, right? And you have to make big decisions that are going to have consequences for decades.
Yeah.
What are the guardrails on those decisions? When we hike taxes, do voters get to decide at the ballot box if that's a good use of money? When we issue a bunch of debt for a big long-term project, is that something voters get to approve? Does the city council actually serve as a check on the mayor's power? Are they really legislators, or are they just kind of figureheads?
Yeah.
And what are those sorts of powers? So I think it's a really powerful way to look at the functioning of a city, and it's kind of like under-discussed. People don't talk about it a lot.
No, not at all. Not at all. And it's good to just get people to understand that they have these things they can point to and say, like, hey, we have power in this way, and here's how we can actually change things in our city. Very cool. So Austin, do you like pizza?
I love pizza.
Okay, awesome. And so do you like the deep dish pizza here in Chicago?
So here's the dirty little secret about deep dish pizza. we Chicagoans do not eat deep dish pizza very much. It's a rare thing. We eat it on occasions like this, and I'm happy to eat it.
Yeah.
All pizza is good pizza to me.
Somebody comes in from out of town.
They want to try deep dish pizza, I'm all for it. You know what? Like, no shame in that whatsoever. But if you're at like a barbecue or someone's birthday or, you know, all that stuff, you grow up eating thin crust, tavern style pizza.
Yeah.
And that to me is the true Chicago pizza.
Okay.
No shade to deep dish. There's many varieties of deep dish in Chicago. There's a pizza pot pie that is fabulous on Chicago Pizza and Oven Grinders. We're not going there today.
Yeah.
But Chicago's pizza scene is fabulous. I just don't I can't handle deep dish pizza a lot of the times. I will have to take a nap after this because it's so heavy. But I'm happy to eat it whenever anyone asks.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're gonna get some today. Well, Austin, we're at Paisano's Pizza. We put in our order. It should be here in a little bit. But tell me a little bit more about what you've learned studying Chicago, about cities, how they interact with the states, and that kind of thing.
Totally. So Chicago, the thesis of the book was basically Chicago's an outlier on so many things.
Right.
We spend $30,000 a kid on our education system, yet the outcomes are some of the worst in the country. We have more pension debt than 44 of the 50 US states. We're doing crazy things like selling the rights to the parking meters for 75 years.
Right.
Our public safety outcomes aren't great. There are large swaths, maybe large is a little putting it too strongly, but there are many parts of the city where that can seem lawless and that there is no justice for victims on the public safety side. We have more homicides and a higher homicide rate than New York City and LA combined on a yearly basis, which is crazy. So the question is, how did we become this outlier?
Right.
Is it that Chicagoans are a particular way? Is it because of our weather? What is it?
Yeah, what did you guys find?
And what we found is that it's all about structuring government in a way that encourages good decision making, that encourages democracy, that encourages collaboration.
Right, yeah.
And what we have is really strongman governance. So the mayors in Chicago are less like a governor of a state. They're more like, you'll see in Central and South America this phrase caudillos.
Okay,
strongman
like a warlord.
Exactly, right. And you even see it in the vocabulary, right? So we're in a ward right now. You don't have wards in other political systems, right? A ward is where you have sick people or people that you need to take care of. The alderman, instead of a city council member, right? It's an alderman, it's the elder of the village, right? It's these sort of almost prehistoric sounding things, or feudal sort of things, right? And that's very unique to here. And that comes from our governance structure because these aldermen, we talk about crime in Chicago, the body with the highest crime rate in the city is the city council.
Wow.
There's been 40 aldermen, more than 40 aldermen that have been indicted on corruption charges since the 70s. 40. In Illinois statewide, there's been on average one public corruption conviction per week for the last 40 years.
And you were saying somebody was an alderman for a long time. Is it like they get these positions and are able to keep them for a while?
They keep them for a ton of time because there's such an incumbency advantage because it's not like a member of Congress where their power comes from being able to vote up or down on some big nationwide issue, right? Their power comes from, say, Paisano's wants to have this little sidewalk cafe out here, right? They don't go to some, a zoning board or some professional bureaucrat. They have to rely on at least, not necessarily the goodwill, but at least the ambivalence of the alderman, the local politician. And that's that sort of ombudsman-like bureaucratic function that they play. That's what sends them to prison, 100% of the time. So
you got to go through me, and I want stuff.
Exactly. And it's so deep culturally that sometimes it's not even said. It's just sort of an expectation. And that's a really big drag on businesses in Chicago. And then it's also not only a drag on businesses, if you think about the decision making that comes out of a body like that, they don't care about citywide issues. Their staff is all focused on who needs a garbage can, who needs a pothole fixed, right? They're not studying the budget that has 250,000 line items in it, right? So what you learn about cities is the responsibilities you entrust in those different officials matters a lot for the type of decisions that you're going to get.
Yeah, and so like, is there you had some ideas like what you would do? I mean, can you actually change it? Like, do people come to you? You mentioned in the past you had the three-step process, and people just shrug their shoulders. I mean, have you had any luck getting people to say like, hey, we can do something?
Yeah, so the city charter thing is such a great, I really liked that idea, not only because it's so simple and people are like, a what? And every other city has it. It's also sort of like pre-partisan, because it's not really like a left or a right idea.
Right.
All the cities that we're comparing Chicago to are big, blue, union-friendly, union-strong cities.
And they have this.
And have the ability to make good decisions and aren't in as deep of a hole as Chicago is in many aspects. So that has really taken, so we published the book in 2019, and you start seeing mayoral candidates talk about it.
Yeah.
And it really has become, in my view, sort of a litmus test for whether you're someone who's going to talk a big game on reform.
Yeah.
If you're going to just, do platitudes about like, we're going to get all the corrupt aldermen out of office. It's like, well, if indictments worked as an anti-corruption strategy, we would be the least corrupt city.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead, we have the most indictments, and we just continue to have the most indictments, right? Like structurally, you have to change something.
Yeah.
So I've been really encouraged because it's sort of a new idea. Chicago tried to pass one around 100 years ago. This is the last time we really, as a city, had a discussion about this. And the coolest thing about it to me is that it's not coming from on high. It's not coming from the political power players that be. Voters have to approve it.
Yeah.
We decide how our city is governed, not politicians.
Yeah, that would be exciting. Yeah, so it's one of those things I think people, at least in North Carolina where we're from, we probably have all our cities probably have the charter and stuff like that, and something we can go back and say like, hey, appreciate it.
Appreciate it, or take another look at how it's structured and think about the National Civic League every year puts out a guide to charter commissions. So you can get people from the community involved in their democracy and say, hey, what parts of this need to be changed or updated? And it's a really good way to get people involved in government. Locally.
I mean, do you think it's like a mindset thing that people maybe haven't, like at least in North Carolina, when everybody's successful and everything's going well, nobody's really paying attention to their government. Right. So it's something I think you want to remind people to always keep an eye on it. At least one eye on it.
And the other thing is like. There's a phrase we used in the book, success often stumbles, but problems seldom do.
Right.
So, you have a lot of cities in your in North Carolina that are really growing, that are thriving for now.
Right.
But what if that changes? Do you have the frameworks in place that are going to keep those things thriving and encourage good decision making?
No, it's true.
Or not? And so I think a lot of people get obsessed with national politics because that's what media focuses on, and it's very sexy, and it's like a reality TV show.
Lots of lights.
Right. But what affects your life the most is really how your city functions, how your community functions, right? And that's where, if you're going to spend time thinking about policy and politics, I feel like that's the biggest return on investment to think about.
Yeah, because you can go talk to those people. I mean, they're literally a lot of times your neighbors.
Call them up.
And they will talk to you, and a lot of them, you'd be surprised that they actually do care, and just a couple people show up and say like, hey, we care, just letting you know we care, and here's what we care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other cool thing about it, what we learned during the book is public officials from other places are so happy to talk. No one's ever called them up and asked like the chief of staff at the place that does water treatment or something, what they think about how decisions are made, right? Yeah. And you can learn a lot just by doing that with other where you see cities that are successful. You can learn a lot from what they're doing.
Yeah, it's like in like just any kind of corporate environment, where they just sort of survey the employees. Like, what do you think? So this is the Rudy's special, I think the deep dish version. So we'll give it a shot and see.
We'll give it a shot.
See what you think.
Yeah, we'll say it's usually, completely against people using fork and knife with pizza. With deep dish, it's completely okay.
We might have
so
to.
Don't feel ashamed. I mean, I will. I'm going to do one.
Yeah, so thank you for having the deep dish as a courtesy to us visiting from out of town.
Of course. And this is very, like, some deep dish you'll find really very deep. This is a little more of a shallow pan.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah,
I mean, you
perfect,
can have it
yeah.
once quarterly is probably the most you would want to have.
Yeah, yeah.
Deep dish pizza.
Enough time to enjoy it, forget about it, let it do its damage.
It's a special treat.
And we also got, just in case you get too, you want to eat something a little different, we got the regular dish pizza.
Yeah. Tavern style.
Yeah, tavern style?
Tavern style is
Okay.
what we call the thin crust.
Alright.
Yeah, which looks great as well.
Okay. Now we can just eat our pizza.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, well, Austin, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Having pizza.
My pleasure.
Giving us the down low on the deep dish. And the, what did you call this pizza again?
Tavern style.
Tavern
I think
style.
if the people in the comment section, I might be wrong. Maybe
Yeah.
they could correct us.
Somebody will
I'm
tell us.
almost
Yeah,
positive.
guaranteed.
But it's great. Everything is great. Thanks so much.
And we learned so much. And hope to come see you again when we're in town.
Oh, anytime.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Many thanks to Austin Berg. His book is called The New Chicago Way, Lessons from Other Big Cities. And you can read more about his work at illinoispolicy.org. Thanks for joining us on Policy Pizza. And don't forget to like and share our videos, and of course subscribe to the John Locke Foundation on YouTube.